We're moving on now to perfect participles, what Mounce calls combinative aspect. And then we'll look at adjectival participles and finally the genitive absolute. So we're going to review the rules for forming perfect tense participles. We'll also review the functions of adjectival participles and look at some examples. Then we'll review what the genitive absolute does and then work through some examples. So perfect participles, they involve reduplication, just as we saw for the perfect indicative. They use the perfect tense stem, a tense formative, which is kappa, a participle morpheme, which for the active is omicron tau. For the feminine, that morphs over to wea, upsilon iota alpha. For the middle passive, we see our very familiar mena and mene. The combined tense formative and the participle morpheme is kat for masculine and neuter, and it's quia for feminine. And then we have a case ending. Like the present tense, for active masculine, we use third declension endings, and for the neuter, we use third declension endings. For the feminine, we use first declension. For the middle passive, we use second declension endings for the masculine and for the neuter, and then first declension for the feminine. This is the same as the patterns that we have for the present tense. So we're looking at section 30.6. These are perfect active participles. The first thing to notice here is that we see reduplication. So in luo, we see lelu, lelukos, lelukatas. And that reduplication is going to be the same as it is for perfect active indicative verbs. If we look at the genitive form to get the most information, we'll see our kat showing up there. And then we have the third declension ending here, as. Pretty much the endings are normal. Sa, as, I, a, s, on, sin, as. The tau here for the nominative singular drops out and the omicron lengthens. Other than that, it's pretty normal. For the feminines, we said that the tense formative plus the participle morpheme would come out to quia, and we see that all the way down the first declensions here, a, as, a, an. For the perfects, they're all alpha endings, and that's one first declension pattern. And then the plurals are normal. And the neuter is just a normal third declension. Note that the omicron does not lengthen, thus the omicron tau bumps up against the sigma, and we just get as as our ending. As usual, we want to focus on the nominative singular and the genitive singular rows for memorization. Now let's take a look at the perfect middle passive participles. This is section 30.8. Once again, we notice the reduplication. Here's our very familiar men for the tense formative, and we're looking at second declension endings. So as, u, o, an, and the neuter also has second declension. The feminine has first declension. But again, these men morphemes are going to tell us that we have middle passive. And the reduplication is going to help us know that we're looking at perfect. So here are some examples. We have kekleikos. This is a perfect active participle. It's nominative masculine singular from kaleo. And so we have the perfect stem clay together with the reduplicated ke. And then we have another kappa. This is the tense formative. Then we have the participle morpheme omicron tau. When that tau bumps up against the sigma ending for the third declension, the tau drops out and the omicron lengthens to omega. Here we have kekliquia. So we have the perfect stem kli, and then the reduplication ke, then another kappa. This is the tense formative. And then we have the feminine participle morpheme. Remember that we said that for the masculines and neuters, the combination would be kat, and for the feminines, it would be kuya. And then the ending here is null, so it's a feminine nominative. Our next example is ernemenon. This comes from arneamai, which is to deny. The alpha is being lengthened here, and we see the men, which is our signal that we're looking at a middle anyway, possibly middle passive. If it's perfect, it's middle passive. So we have a perfect middle passive participle, and then our ending here, since it's a middle passive, we're going to be looking at second declension, and this is going to be a genitive plural, either masculine or neuter. And so we have the alpha is lengthened to eta as the for reduplication, and then the rest of the stem here, ern, plus the tense formative mena, and then the case ending, which is own. And so all of this comes together to ernemenon. So what's the meaning of the perfect participle? In terms of aspect, it would be combinative. So the standard definition is that the perfect tense has combinative aspect, which means an action that occurred in the past that has continuing effects into the time of the speaker. So the present from the perspective of the speaker. And this definition is obviously subject to context. So let's talk briefly about periphrastic constructions. This is something that occurs quite a bit in the New Testament, and it's an important concept. The idea is that we have a form of ami, to be, plus a participle. Now in English, we have a rough equivalent with our to be helping verbs. For instance, I am going, or he was working, or he had been trying to call. Greek has a number of ways to combine tenses of ami, present tense, past tense, with tenses of participles to express a kind of hybrid tense. So as an example, we can take an imperfect form of ami, was, and put it together with a present participle, and we would get here ein didaskon. This would be the equivalent of he was teaching. And so this is what can be known as a periphrastic imperfect. It's expressing an imperfect aspect, but it's doing it in this periphrastic construction. Another example is the present tense of ami plus a perfect participle. So we have estin gegramenon. Literally, this is it is having been written. We would translate this as it has been written. This would be a way of approximating a perfect tense using a periphrastic construction. Another example is we could use an imperfect of ami, so was, plus a perfect participle. In this case, middle passive. So we could say ein beblemenas. This is literally he was having been thrown. We would say then he had been thrown. And so this way we're using a periphrastic construction to express a pluperfect verb idea. I had done something. So there's a number of different combinations. Mounts talks about 6 of them in section 30.16 of his book. It is worth being familiar with these because they occur regularly in the New Testament. We're going to touch on adjectival participles. Actually, we've introduced them already and we've seen examples of them already. So participles can have adjectival function, and as we've mentioned, they can be attributive. For example, in Romans 8:24, we have the expression elpis blepamene, literally a seen hope. This would be translated a hope that is seen. We've also talked about another adjectival function, and that is a substantive adjective function. Often the substantives have a definite article. So here we have ha ekon tas en tolas mu kai teron autas ekenas estin ha agapon me. This is John 14:21. So the one who has tas en tolas mu, my commandments, kai teron autas, the one who keeps them, and the one who keeps them, ekenas, that one, estin ha, that one is ha agapon, the one who loves me. So the one who has my commandments and the one who keeps them, that one is the one who loves me. So 3 examples in one verse of substantive participles. One interesting piece of Greek grammar that happens fairly frequently actually is called the genitive absolute. Genitive absolute occurs when a genitive participial phrase has a different subject from the main verb and its subject. So here are the conditions for a genitive absolute. The noun or the pronoun is in the genitive case. There's a genitive participle with no article. There's a different subject from the subject of the main verb. And often these are at the beginning of a sentence. So here's an example. Kai eti autu laluntas, idou iudas eiston dodeca eilthen. And so here we have a genitive phrase, autu laluntas, literally he speaking. This is referring to Jesus in the context. And then idou iudas, behold Judas, one of the 12, came. So we have, while he was yet speaking, eti would be yet speaking, behold Judas, one of the 12, came. And notice that the genitive phrase here is referring to Jesus doing something. And the main verb, eilthen, refers to Judas. So it's a different subject. So we have autu laluntas, and that is a combination of a genitive pronoun, autu, plus a genitive participle from the verb laleo, and we would translate that while he was speaking. Notice that there is no definite article with that participle. The subject of the genitive phrase, he, refers to Jesus, but the subject of the main verb is Judas. So here's an example of a genitive absolute. Let's look at some examples from the workbook, Basics of Biblical Greek, and this is from chapter 30. And number 4 is from John 3:6. And so I'll go ahead and read that. Ta gagenemenon, hard to say, ekte sarkas sarx estin. Kai ta gagenemenon ektu pneumatas pneuma estin. Fairly famous verse from John 3:6 is conversation with Nicodemus. We have 2 instances of the same perfect participle here. Gagenemenon. So notice first the men is telling us that it's a middle, and the gegen, that looks a lot like reduplication. So we're looking at a perfect middle passive participle. The root is genao, and genao means to beget or to give birth to. The middle passive idea is what has been born. This is nominative neuter singular. If it was masculine, we might say the one who has been born. But in this case, we're talking about neuter, so it's more like the thing that has been born or what has been born. He's talking about a generic principle. And then, ek tes sarkas, out of flesh, sarx estin. I think we looked at this verse when we were looking at third declensions a while back. So, ek tes sarkas, nice third declension noun, out of the flesh, flesh is. So what has been born out of the flesh is flesh. Kai, same participle, ta gagene menon, and we would say what has been born out of the spirit, pneumatos, pneuma estin, spirit is or is spirit. Here we have a participle being used substantively. It is the subject of this sentence. What is born is flesh. So it's the subject of both of these sentences, actually. The same participle is the subject of both of these sentences. What is born is spirit. Is there significance to the perfect tense of these two participles? Does the combinative idea of past action with continuing effects into the present fit here? Well, clearly it does. What has been born of flesh continues to be flesh, and what has been born of spirit continues to be spirit. So here is a case where the normal definition of the perfect tense works well. Let's take a look at this next one here. This is John 8:30 and part of 8:31. It provides an example of both a genitive absolute and a perfect participle. Let's read it. Tauta autu laluntas paloi epistusan esautan. So that's verse 30. So we have here, interestingly, a genitive masculine singular pronoun, and then we have this genitive participle. So let's take a look and see if we could get a genitive absolute out of this. Well, these things, his speaking, or he was speaking these things, and then we have paloi epistusan. So many, and then we have an aorist verb here, active indicative, third plural. So that's definitely different than this singular genitive over here. This is referring to Jesus speaking, and this is referring to the paloi, the many who are believing. So the subject has changed here. The subject in the first part is Jesus speaking. This is the genitive phrase. And then we have our main verb with a different subject, the many who are believing. This is saying, as he was speaking these things, tauta is this neuter plural that we can translate as these things. As he was speaking these things, many believed esautan, in him or unto him. We would just say in him. So that's a genitive absolute. And then verse 32, elegen un hiesus pros tus pepestukatas auto Judaius. So here we have a imperfect, elegen. So he said, or potentially he was saying, context might just dictate that we say he said, un, therefore, hiesus. So Jesus said, therefore, pros tus pepistukatas, to the, and here we have a perfect, that's the pepist, and the pe is telling us it's perfect, and then this kat is telling us that we have an active. The as is telling us that we're looking at an accusative masculine plural. So those endings s, on, sin, as, that's accusative plural. So we have a perfect active participle, accusative masculine plural from pistuo, and it is part of this extended prepositional phrase from pros all the way through the end here. And so we end up with Judaius, which is also accusative masculine plural. And then we have auto, in him. So let's try to put all this together. So we have this extended prepositional phrase here. Jesus is talking to the Jews who believed in him. Or I guess we would say who have believed in him. It's this perfect participle. So this participle seems to be relating to Jews. We could look at it attributively, and the somewhat wooden sense would be Jesus said to the believing in him Jews, which is awkward, but kind of gets the point across. So we could see this attributively, and here the participle is relating to the noun Judaios. They both are accusative masculine plural, so that fits. And then the article could be applying to both of them. And so you have a article, adjective, noun, first attributive relationship. So reading the whole sentence, Jesus said, therefore, to the Jews who believed in him, and then the verse goes on, if you continue in my word, you are my disciples indeed, and you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free.